right, Farrell, a lot to talk about. But before we get into White Rabbit Cannabis, like to start with hearing your franchise story. So, how do you even fall into franchising? How did your personal career get lined up into franchising?
Well, I started working with White Rabbit Cannabis as a marketing guy and became very friendly with the ownership and started looking at the next wave of opportunity. And franchising just seemed to make the most sense because in Washington, you can only own so many licenses before you get in trouble with the state control board for businesses. So by franchising, everybody is their own ownership. So it kind of goes around that being an issue. And as long as, Washington accepted franchising for cannabis, which turns out they do, we were able to move forward on that. So it turns out the first franchisee that we got was actually in New Jersey, and they haven't actually opened yet, but they have a conditional license that they were granted, which we helped them through the whole licensing process with the state and walk them through getting all their ducks lined in a row and all that. So that is we're just at the beginning, and we have been working on it a couple of years. So if I thought it was going to be this hard at the beginning, I don't know what I would have thought, but we feel closer than ever. And now, just because of the way the industry is working, licenses are becoming available. There are existing sort of turnkey solutions in Washington State, which is great because obviously we have the most familiarity there and connections and all that. So that's kind of where we're at right now is taking where we find a distressed license that somebody's wanting to get out of as quickly as possible. We're trying to move a franchisee into turning it into a White Rabbit.
All right. So going backwards, you're helping them on marketing, or you're in a marketing career and you get them as a client, and then all of a sudden they're like, all right, thanks for helping brand us, but now we got to figure out how we're going to grow this. Is that?
Yes, that's pretty much it. And in Washington at the original location, which is in Linwood, that is the most competitive area in Washington. It's a lot of states have what's called a green mile, where you're kind of the zone of area where you're allowed to operate a cannabis business, and so those areas become very crowded because everybody that's the only place they can go. So the market is insane. I mean, there's a store across the street, 2 doors down, 20 stores within 8 mile square radius. So it's highly competitive environment, and setting yourself apart in that is what it's all about. So that's where I came into the picture. But the store was already a great store to begin with. I just came in and started working like the online angles and other marketing opportunities.
All right, being in marketing, you fall into this thing. And clearly, I mean, all of the news around the cannabis business has been somewhat favorable because it's a completely unknown world that brands or businesses are trying to enter and figure out how do we navigate this landscape. So from excitement on day one to I hear, well, as things got going, it got a little bit complex. And I would imagine that's because states regulate differently. And frankly, there's still no blueprint made for how can you actually survive or thrive in the cannabis business when it comes to a retail franchise experience.
Right. And it's very different than I would think. And from everybody I've talked to, and it comes from the franchising world, franchising a retail business for anything else, very different than cannabis, obviously, not just because of the regulatory aspect, but the way it's taxed, and you basically are working with one hand tied behind your back and one leg tied as well. So you don't have all the same advantages of a regular business. So it's definitely more complex to succeed in the world of cannabis. And a lot of people think that, oh, I'm going to get a cannabis store and I'm going to make $1 gazillion because everybody loves weed, and it's just not that simple, and it really requires like an extra level of business competence to succeed in that. And that's why franchising is a great way to go, because you gain that experience of someone that has worked the model. And in a state like Washington, where literally Washington was the first state to legalize recreational cannabis, you have with White Rabbit like 8 years of experience in that kind of super competitive market. And I don't know if that's, can you guys hear that? My street, they're cutting trees, so they're going by. I don't know if
It's
that's
all right. You're good.
noise. All right.
It's like white noise. So I mean, it kind of fits on brand. So we're good.
Yeah, good.
So, I mean, like I will say, when we're consulting a franchise brand, we always start off with what is the why you why now. And given from where I'm standing, you haven't built out the franchise positioning yet. But if I'm guiding you towards how do you set up the positioning, and I'm curious on what the point of differentiation is going to be as more and more brands enter the space, but for why I want to enter franchising with a brand like White Rabbit is if I've decided I want to be in the cannabis space, you've offset all this time and energy and knowledge base. And so when I'm buying a franchise from you, you've actually done a lot more legwork than, say, a traditional burger brand. A burger brand can say, we're going to show you how to make our burger that's more special than everything else. But the reality is you could go stand up a burger restaurant tomorrow without a ton of hurdles to get over, because you can set up your supply chain very easily.
Right.
For here, the why franchising with you, it's like, look, this is, yes, there's the potential to make a lot of money in this category, but you're buying into our franchise because of all the time, energy, money, blood, sweat, and tears that went into figuring out how do we actually build a business that can open in another state.
Right. And one of the huge challenges of that is, and which we've also run down, is that there's no cross state line commerce. So vetting your supply chain through each state is a significant part of what's going to make it successful, because one of the things that differentiates us in our market is not just the customer service, but also the line of products. And where you have a lot of these stores all are kind of competing on the same level of carrying the cheapest big brand name vendors. We're not after that, and we're not trying to be that bargain basement sort of cheap sort of solution in the market. We're really trying to set ourselves apart and have an identity based on the quality of the products, the quality of the service, and translating that into other states is a big part of what we do and will do.
I mean, my gut says we would have to go back to alcohol, when alcohol was illegal, to now all of a sudden being something that could be sold legally in bars before it was in basements. Mm-hmm. And then how do you become a distributor or a creator of alcohol products? But
that's a great analogy, because with alcohol, one of the ways that it became it's sort of the stepping stone process to legalization again was the medical market, and your places like that were able to sell legal alcohol they were selling medical alcohol basically, and not and I don't mean rubbing alcohol. I mean it's something that you could drink, and spirits. So that's the world that we came out of, is the medical market, and it's one thing that we've still preserved in the transition to recreational in Washington. In Washington, to even claim any sort of connection to medical marijuana at this point, you have to get an endorsement with the state, which requires some money and some extra training of the bud tenders and stuff like that. So that's a very important part of the market is to still address the medical users. And in a state like Washington, yeah, that's an extra hurdle to jump. But it's important because that is still the landscape of the entire country, is whether it's medical or recreational, somewhere in between, or even just the places where you can only do CBD stores still. We definitely want to be part of that whole transition and still accommodate that side of the market as well.
When I was looking at your personal background and your story, I'm just going to say it totally made sense on why you are captain of this ship. And I don't know how much you want to talk about it, but you were in a category in adult entertainment that had to
I have I have a funny backstory, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I think like the reality is, because I saw you got involved in '93, so you're going through internet and regulation and all the things that you had to overcome there, or even for it to be okay to talk about, which, Hollywood and television and HBO and everything else that made it where it is today. If you go back to 1993, it is a hush hush thing that nobody can even have a discussion about. Weed, if you go back to, probably before even Hollywood started making it a part of the culture, it was hush hush. You don't talk about it, and it's looked down. So when I was looking through your story, I was like, okay, it makes sense why you're the captain of this ship, because you've had to do it before in your career, and a thing to say like, it's not that big of a deal, guys, and now let's figure out how we monetize and grow a business. Is that accurate?
I'm super impressed that you did your homework there, and I appreciate your take on it. It's a huge compliment to me, and I appreciate it. That is certainly part of it. And back in the days with Homegrown, which is funny that I owned a company called Homegrown. That was a big part of what we tried to do, was put a face on the product that communicated something that, hey, this is okay. It's not something that is the stereotype that people associate with it, that's negative. And it's certainly part of why I became so attracted to White Rabbit, because the ownership there, Teresa and company, that's exactly what they're trying to do, which is really, be a good neighbor and be a very reasonable and rational kind of, business person, so that you start to associate cannabis not as something that is a taboo, but is something that is very normal and is probably really good for society, as we like to think. Peace, love, and great cannabis. It is, maybe a little bit of a hippie ideal, but I also carry my Grateful Dead background into that, so it's all good there.
Can you look back at what you had to engineer in the adult entertainment world and say, it's not like what the clear pathway is with cannabis as it relates back to what you're going to be able to do from a franchise standpoint, but it's almost like before you ever get on an airplane, you have no idea what it feels like to go through turbulence, and you're scared and uncomfortable. But when you've gone through that once before, then the next time you're like, okay, that feels familiar. Is it almost like that the roadmap is familiar for what you have to navigate for turning this into something that is okay, mainstream, and even from a regulation standpoint, adult film industry had to go through the same thing, where state by state regulations might be different depending who's in politics in that state. Is there a lot of similarities in what this roadmap is?
It is very similar, and I actually go back even to my days following Grateful Dead around, where working, selling stuff in the parking lots. There's a book. I think it's called the Marketing According to the Grateful Dead or something. It's written by the guy that started HubSpot, and it talks about that sort of grassroots marketing and the challenges of creating a brand in that way. Great book. But that's what led me to how to approach the adult industry stuff. And then through the adult industry, because yes, certain zip codes you couldn't ship to or whatever. There were all, sort of state by state issues to address. That kind of guided me through to where we are now with cannabis, and the labyrinth of what each state says is okay or not okay, and whether that's the signage or what you can purchase in the store, or the THC levels in the product. I mean, the types of packaging, whether you can open it or whether you can have a grow system and be a vertical integration, or all of those things. Yes, it did give me that sort of background to understand those issues, and it's been very helpful.
You did say at the opening, if you knew then what you know now, you're like, okay, it's been a roller coaster. Does that, like, are you still as optimistic? Or are you like, we just need more time and more competition even to just create a singular narrative so that this can be as normalized as say opening up a burger restaurant?
I think so. I don't think it will ever be quite that easy as a burger restaurant, just because it is a healthcare product on a lot of levels. So it's different than just a grocery type. I mean, a food court or something like that store. So I think that it will always have certain level of challenges, and especially because it's regulated in the way that it is, and always will be. And until that changes vastly, there's certainly going to be issues. And also, the banking issues are kind of similar to what we experienced in adult back in the day. So I don't see it changing too quickly, but I know that the wheels grind slowly. So, it might be another 5 years, it could be another 10 years, but I definitely think it'll get easier, and especially when we all think that federal legalization will happen at some point. I mean, it's already past the tipping point of what it was with alcohol prohibition. We're already past that number of states that have legalized medical or recreational to go the full distance. But it just somebody's got to push that final lever on the control.
So with that, I mean, like if I'm talking to a traditional franchise, they might say, I want to sell or award 10 locations in the next year. But it's all based on data of what can be done. Like, how do you establish what winning is for the organization when it's so reliant on policy?
Winning is getting through the state licensing process, because that's the biggest challenge is going from no license to operate to getting a license, because the bar is so steep as far as having a security system and having the transparency that the state needs, and being connected through whatever reporting requirements are involved. Those are the issues. But as soon as somebody has a license, then it becomes a much easier downhill ride. And as far as once a store can open, yes, it's very similar to any sort of retail experience, and it's a little bit like a market, because you're dealing with a product, especially with flower, where 1 month the grower produces the best thing ever, and the next month they have a terrible crop and they don't produce as much, or it's not as good, or whatever. So you're constantly kind of dealing with those issues once the doors are open. But if you do it right, then you can mitigate all those kind of problems. And if you have a good system, then you're keeping customers happy and providing them with a consistent experience, which is, I think, one of the bigger challenges.
Were there any hurdles in getting your FDD established?
Not really. We worked with a franchise company out of Florida that helped us go through that, and we've now done a couple of iterations of the FDD. So we've gotten much more sophisticated at that. I would say that was one of the easier parts of the process. We're still getting our for the states that require license to operate franchises. We've done a few states, but we can add more of those as well. But we're doing that on a case by case basis of when it's needed.
All right, let's close with this. There's a buyer out there. They're interested in the category. They've now fallen into your website. They're looking around at the business. What do you want them to know about this business opportunity that will make them maybe take a step forward to reaching out?
I would like them to know that it's not just overnight success. There's definitely, you got to go in eyes wide open, and anybody who's telling you that it's this easy process is selling you a load of horse bucky. The most complicated part of the process is getting through to the license, and once that's done, it's not that complicated to open a store and to get products on the shelves and to train the staff and be within spitting distance of making good money. But going through that licensing process, that's where a lot of people are going to fall down, because it takes time. The state looks at you, they look at your where your money's coming from, and so some states are very difficult about how many stores you can operate. So being a multi-store operator it can be a challenge in some states, but everybody deals with that differently, and it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to think about your business structure, and that's part of that whole process of getting through the state trials and tribulations.
Just out of curiosity, so your two first licensees or franchisees, were they customers of the business, or did they just find you online?
They found us through online and through connections, personal connections too.
Look, I enjoy this conversation. I mean, I think it's so uncharted territory, but that's where some great brands have pioneered through. I mean, and it doesn't even have to be something that is going from illegal to legal. It could be as simple as what Curves did when they created basically a rotation model to help people get in shape and lose weight. Like there's all these business concepts that have pioneered, and you're on the forefront of it. Clearly, I mean, with your background, I don't know that there's anybody that's more well equipped to help navigate this and think through it. So
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I mean, it's one of the and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that is one of the things I was worried about is I understood that experience as being useful to this because of exactly that weird gray state of legal versus illegal, and putting a better face on what the negative stereotype is, and transforming that into something positive and beneficial to society is that's this tallest order of what we can do with cannabis. But that's definitely where we're headed, and that's very important to us. So I really appreciate you seeing potential.
Well, and lastly, it's got to work, because Grateful Dead aren't going to tour anymore. So now it's
they'll always be there. The music's going to go on forever, and people are going to smoke weed forever. So yeah, I think we're okay there.
That's great. All right, Farrell, great conversation. Glad that we got to meet. White RabbitCannabis.com right now, and eventually, are you going to have a franchise site? Is that coming next?
Oh yeah, no, marijuanafranchise.com is our domain.
That's great. Love it. So for Farrell, I'm Nick. This is another episode of Meet the Zor. Take care, everybody.